Hello, everyone joining. I'm just going to give a couple minutes so that people can still file in, and then we'll get started. So settle in, grab some tea, coffee, water, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes here while people are still joining. Thanks so much for being here. Hello, good morning, everyone. You're welcome to share in the chat your name, your pronouns, and where you're joining from. And if you're representing an organization, you're welcome to say hello in the chat. Thanks so much for taking time to be with us here today. My name is Erin Navarro. I'm the Senior Coordinator of Learning and Resources here at Volunteer Alberta, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'll be your host for today. And I have a couple of people from the Volunteer Alberta team who are monitoring the chat to see if there's any technical difficulties, or if you have any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. This meeting, I'm like trying to read where everyone's from, and also I'll have to catch up on that later. But this meeting today will be recorded and posted to our resource library. And then all the registered attendees will also be sent a recording and the slides. So thanks so much for being a part of this. You are all on mute, and then we will enable the unmute function after the presentation part. But for now, we ask that any questions you have, again, are posted in the chat. And then when we get to our question and answer discussion time, then I'll help facilitate that using the hands up function in the chat as well. So closed captioning is enabled, and if you have any questions throughout, just again, for the people who are joining, please ask them in the chat, and then we'll have our discussion time at the end. And with that, we'll get started. So welcome to our first session of our 2025 volunteer screening series, The Art of Volunteer Recruitment and Retention. And today we're going to be talking about how do I get more volunteers, and why is that the wrong question? So you're welcome to join me for our land affirmation before we officially get started. So our main office here at Volunteer Alberta is situated on Treaty 6 territory in an area that holds many Indigenous names, but it's referred to by the Neheya people as Amiskwaciy-Waskahigan, and colonially known as Edmonton. Our staff board and work extend into Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories. I'm joining you today from Mohkinstsis, aka Calgary, and on Treaty 7 territory, and we affirm the importance of honoring these historic agreements as well as future treaties. So the land we call Alberta, and from all the different corners of Alberta that we're all representing today, is the ancestral territory and present-day home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Neheya, Dene, Yare, Nakota, Anishinaabe, Niitsitapi, Inuit, and Métis. We are so grateful for their stewardship of this land, and as an act of reconciliation and goodwill, it is our intention to ensure that our organization, along with the entire social impact, nonprofit, voluntary sector that we're all representing, can become good partners in supporting the land and communities. So today, as we talk about volunteerism and recruitment and retention, we can consider our own connection and dependence on one another and to the land as well, and that we can't really do the work that we want to do to impact our communities without one another and without the land that we reside on. So there's much that we can learn from Indigenous people, the Indigenous peoples of this land, as we hope to support each other in our screening efforts. And I just want to personally invite you all to honor the land that we're all residing on from wherever we're joining from. Right now, again, I'm on Treaty 7 territory, and I've seen it done in meetings before when there's so many of us together that we can all just take a breath in and breath and breathe out together to acknowledge the unique little corners of the world that we're residing on currently. So you're welcome to breathe in and out while we acknowledge the land that we're all residing on. Thanks for joining me. And now I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview as to what the Volunteer Screening Program is, or VSP. And this webinar today is brought to you by VSP. But we're a partnership between Volunteer Alberta and the Government of Alberta. VSP is one of the many programs that Volunteer Alberta runs, and we provide educational resources such as this one, and as well as or just to help the nonprofit voluntary sector improve their volunteer screening processes and procedures. And we also offer financial opportunities to aid organizations, such as the Vulnerable Sector Check fee waiver to any participating municipalities. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, you're welcome to reach out, ask questions, have another conversation with us, or look on our website to see if you might be eligible. And also, we offer volunteer screening development microgrants that are dedicated to support organizations in their volunteer screening efforts. And applications generally open in June, so you can keep an eye out for those when June comes around. So we might as well start off on the same page together too. And just as a review, or some people may be new to volunteer screening includes anything from doing an interview or an application, volunteer training, recruitment is a step to screening. Evaluating is also another step. Orientation is another way we screen. Background checks is another way we screen. So all of those little pieces we can fit together to screen volunteers. But the reason why we would ever do that in the first place is twofold. It's about promoting community safety, but it's also about matching volunteers to meaningful roles that mutually benefit all community members that might be impacted, including the organization, including clients and participants of your programming, and the volunteers, and anyone else in the community who might be affected. So that's the reason why we do that. That's the reason why we talk about it together and continue to offer educational resources to promote community safety and matching volunteers to roles that make sense. And the lens through which us here at VSP see volunteer screening through is relationship-based screening. And I would bet that everyone in this meeting today does relationship-based screening in one way or another. And what that does is it just attunes our minds to the human connection, empathy, and reciprocity that can be present in volunteer screening, rather than focusing on paperwork or getting these steps done or checking off a list. So it just emphasizes more of that relationship. And I've heard from so many of you too how important it is to have relationship with volunteers, with clients, with other community members. Relationship-based screening also welcomes volunteers to be equal players in the screening process rather than the organization demanding that it has to be done this one way and there's no there's no nuance or flexibility, but it allows us to work together with volunteers to create volunteer screening and programming that makes sense, that reflects the needs that are present in the community, and that also promotes safety and volunteerism rather than barriers to both of those things. Relationship-based screening can also act as a form of risk mitigation too. So for example, a relationship with a volunteer might mean that they might trust your organization more. That means that they might want to come back and do another shift, that they know who to talk to if they have any concerns. So not only can they help improve your volunteer screening so that it's safer, that it's more meaningful, that it maybe makes more sense for who you're recruiting and the clientele that you're trying to represent. But then that also means that, you know, if something does happen and a volunteer is on the roll, they have received the training that makes sense for them, and that they can help improve on that training or any steps to screening so that it can continue to mitigate risks, but also promote safety. And I've used this metaphor before, so if you've been to the other webinars, I'm saying it for the millionth time. volunteer screening is so much more like a garden than like a machine being, we're all cogs that fit in specific places and we do one thing and it just looks like that. But when we're talking about the gardening metaphor, it really helps to know when it needs to be watered, or perhaps we need to pull a few weeds, or we need to harvest. We're not always going to be recruiting. Sometimes it's just good to evaluate, and that's what I've done in the past. And it helps to know too what needs to happen. So, for example, we didn't always recruit when I was volunteer coordinating. Sometimes it was just evaluating, having those conversations, getting that feedback, building those relationships so that we could improve on our volunteer screening and recruit in a way that was meaningful and that promoted safety. So I hope that all makes sense. With that, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. I'm so thrilled that Scott is able to be here with us. I was super excited to hear that Scott was available to share his wisdom and all of his experience with us today. And so with that, I'll just give a short introduction. So Scott is a born and raised Edmontonian and has been involved in volunteerism and in the voluntary sector for most of his life. And his experience includes being past president of Volunteer Alberta and a member of Volunteer Canada's Advisory Council of Volunteer Centres. He is a past executive director of the Volunteer Center in Sherwood Park and was previously the manager of community engagement at Service Credit Union. And he's currently on the learning and development team at Edmonton Chamber of Voluntary Organizations. So I bet some of you have also crossed paths with him before. So thank you. Join me in welcoming in your own silent way, Scott. And with that, I'll pass it off to you.
Well, thanks for your presentation, Erin, and thank you all for coming. You just said everything I was going to say, so no, I'm kidding. Thanks for that. Yeah, I am situated here on Treaty 6 territory, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, and happy to be continuing these conversations as part of the storytelling that we do on these lands, and really honored and humbled that I've been asked to do this presentation. Like Erin said, I've been around for a lot of years, and things are changing, and they're changing rapidly, and we're still trying to get our finger on what that means. But there are some things that fundamentally we can be doing as organizations to be able to bring more people into our organizations. And so often we get asked the question, and in Volunteer Alberta gets this as well, and volunteer centers across the country, how do I get more volunteers? And my point is that you're asking the wrong question. And so what I'm going to do today is walk you through at a sort of a high level, because you're going to have your own context, and depending on the organization, thanks, Erin, depending on your organization, you're going to have different ways of looking at this. It's really difficult for me to generalize how you should do this specifically, because you could be a social service organization that's working on poverty reduction and homelessness. You could be a festival where you're working with the general population, or a historic site, or you could be a closed membership type group where you're a daycare or a preschool. And so each of those has their own context and their own reasons for bringing volunteers in. And so I encourage you to use your context as best you can with what I'm about to share today. And there will be opportunity for questions throughout. So throw your questions into the chat. I know VA has got their eyes on the chat, and I've got a slide at the end for questions as well. I hope to be able to get this done in about 20 to 30 minutes, and then we can have a conversation afterwards as well. So my agenda is, it's actually, I'm gonna back up and look at the volunteer management life cycle. I'm going to oversimplify it simply because we need to, for the context of the the variety of groups that we've got today. But I'm actually also going to do it backwards from what you're used to seeing. Because normally what we would do is we would bring the volunteer, we'd advertise for the volunteer position, we'd screen the volunteer, we'd do the training orientation, and then we put them in the volunteer thing, whatever that is. But I would argue as you're building and designing what you're providing for a volunteer opportunity, that you actually need to do it in reverse. And so what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about what you're asking them to do. What's the actual thing that you're asking a volunteer to do? And you need to be very intentional about that, because that's going to feed what happens at the front end eventually. We're going to talk about downtime throughout the screening process. Aaron talked about relationship building throughout the screening process, and there are some great ways to do that. So I'll be able to give you some tips and tricks about some of that downtime. We'll talk about the barriers that we intentionally or unintentionally create in our screening processes. We can talk about how to identify those and where to focus your energy and how to think about that in a different way. And then we'll look at the front end. What's your call to action? What's your marketing message? How are you getting people to pause Netflix, go back to their phone and start doing a little search, or sit down at their laptop and really start thinking about what they can do to contribute back to the world that they're passionate about. So we'll start with thank you. Oh man, you can just read my mind. I love this. This is not rehearsed. So you need to sit back and think about what it is you're asking them to do in the first place. And the term that we're starting to use is providing just work. And not just as in only work, because you hear people, I'm just a volunteer. No, that's not what I mean. Providing just as in the word justice. We see the word just volunteerism to replace the word work, because some people are uncomfortable with the word work. Use them interchangeably. I don't care. I won't be offended either way. But make sure that you're providing an opportunity that is meaningful. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that it aligns with your vision, mission, and values. Make sure that it aligns with strategic plans, goals, and objectives. Make sure it aligns with serving your population, whatever that is, whether it's clients, whether it's the general public, whatever it is and whoever it is that you're serving. And it could be a whatever. There are environmental organizations that you're serving the environment and not humans, although ultimately humans, I guess. But you could be an animal serving organization. You could be working with wildlife. Make sure that what you're doing is aligning with the vision, mission, and values of the organization, and make it client centric. Be clear about your expectations. What is it that you are asking folks to do? And make sure that you're clear with your team as well. So this isn't just about the potential volunteer. Make sure your team is clear on what the ask is of the volunteer, and make sure that there's a job description, that everyone understands it, and make sure you've got a brief summary of it so that you can share it at a high level with folks that want to engage just at a high level. They don't want to read a 5-page job description. Be clear about the commitment. I can't tell you the number of times people undersell the position. Think about board members. Oh, it's a 2-hour meeting once a month. That's garbage. Board meetings are not a 2-hour commitment once a month. There's prep work, there's follow-up work, there's sometimes committee work. Do not be absolutely honest and clear with everyone around the position, the supervisors, the potential volunteer, whoever it is that's connected with the position. Make it compelling. Don't fill the position with menial tasks that you don't want to do or that the staff team doesn't want to do. Um, Make it a role that people want to do because you're asking them to do it without paying them. And so often you see volunteers walking around festivals picking up garbage, or they're doing some mindless data entry, things like that. Um, if there are folks that want to do that sort of thing, that's fine. Um, but more often than not, we end up giving volunteers roles that we don't want to do as paid staff. So do think about how you're offering the role. Um, Demonstrate how what they're going to do is going to have an impact on the community that you're serving, first and foremost. Because as much as you like to think that it's about serving your organization, you're actually serving a particular demographic, whether it's animals, the environment, people who are homeless, people who are experiencing some kind of health condition. This is about them. It actually isn't about your organization, believe it or not. Demonstrate how it has impact. And then be as flexible as you can. And by flexibility, I mean, not just about whether or not they do it around certain times, certain hours, or online, although it can be that, but also think about a volunteer's travel time. Think about how they're getting to your space. Are they on transit? Do they have to Uber? Can they drive? Are they walking? Think about barriers like childcare. Are you willing to pay for their childcare costs while they volunteer? Make sure that you're giving them breaks when they need to be able to take a break. Festivals are sometimes guilty of that, where they just send someone out into the wilderness and they're volunteering and volunteering and volunteering, and all of a sudden, 11 hours later, they come back exhausted, looking for a glass of water, going, "Where'd you go?" So treat them well. And anything else that reduces barriers to volunteer involvement, make sure that you're thinking about those things and that you take them into consideration as you're providing and describing the work for your volunteers. So on the next slide, we'll talk about, I want to talk about the downtime, because when you're bringing folks on board into your organization, time really is your enemy. The people, we live in such a world of immediacy and immediate gratification right now. This is no different. You'd be sitting on the couch and somebody used the term channel surfing the other day around here, and I laughed because there's a whole generation of people that doesn't understand what channel surfing means, but I miss those days. There are several movies that I've never actually seen the beginnings of because that's just the way we used to watch television and consume my entertainment. But when someone decides that they want to make a difference in their community, whatever that looks like, you need to move quickly. And so any work that you can do concurrently while you're engaging with this potential volunteer is crucial. So ahead of time, take the time to go through your own screening and onboarding process. Start with the moment that someone engages with your organization, right from the time they hit your website. What do they see? What are they moving into? How quickly are they moving through the process? I can't tell you the number of times it drives me crazy where you go and look at an organization's website. Yeah, I want to volunteer. And the first thing I have to do is create a profile. That is such an inhuman thing and an unengaging way to engage with a person for the very first time. Drives me absolutely crazy. And it happens so often. Even an application form. Well, I got to fill out the digital application form. How about reach out via email? Is there a way to text the organization? A phone number people forget that we use phones to talk on the phone. Start building that relationship and make it available in any way that the volunteer wants to be able to engage with you. Sure, you can still have the form, but make sure that there's a way. If I don't want to fill out the form, I just want to talk to someone, make that an option. Make the entry points as easy and as fluid as possible. Um, as you're going through that process and identify the downtime, where are the lags in communication? So you come in, you fill out the application form. Yep, we got an interview scheduled. We'll interview you in 10 days. Well, what's happening in that 10 days? Are they just sitting there waiting to come in? Can you be sending them information about your cause? Could you be referring them to spots on your website, or other websites that help inform them about the cause uh, that you're about to engage them in? Could you begin the training process? Here's a YouTube video. You could learn about the thing, whatever it is. And that way you've started to begin engaging with them and orienting them to what it is that they're going to be doing. And go through that go all the way through the process. Again, do you need a police record check? If you need a police record check, what's that going to look like? Because oftentimes it doesn't come right while you're sitting there. It does in some cases, but it can sometime, if you're doing a vulnerable sector check or whatever it's called, wherever you come from, that process can take time. So what are you doing to build a relationship in amongst all of that downtime? And then schedule that. So day 3, we've got an annual report we can send you. Annual reports are kind of dry. That was a terrible example. I apologize. I retract that. But what are the other places that you can send them to help them understand? And don't overwhelm them, but make sure you let them know that you're thinking about them as they're waiting. And engage your employees in that as well. So if they're going to be potentially volunteering in another area of the organization that you need them to learn more about, connect them with that team member. Don't be the gatekeeper. You need to be developing relationships with others around as well. And so you need the others in your organization to buy in to this process. So as far as downtime, yeah, eliminate that as best you can, because depending on the organization, we hear stories that approximately 30% of the people you engage with will drop off from the moment they fill out your application form to the time they start volunteering. And that's a tremendous loss. That's if you're really looking for folks to fill some gaps in your organization, a 30% attrition rate is quite large. So moving on to the next section, thinking about your barriers. What are your tripping points? And this is what we call intentional risk management. So again, what's the first thing people see when they engage with you? They hit your homepage on your website, by and large, although they might sniff around your social media. They might have seen a post from a family member or a friend on social media. And so that's their entry point. What are they seeing when they go there? We'll click on the profile, see what it is they post about, get a feel for them. And is that narrative something that's compelling? Do you feel and recognizing that that your social media channels and even your website have different intended audiences? You need to have ways that make it easy to get through and cut through that, okay, I am this audience. I am a potential volunteer. I can click on the link that says get involved. There's probably a drop down that says make a donation or become a volunteer, or perhaps you can get involved in other ways. But becoming a volunteer should be very, very prominent on your website and in your social media channels, if that's a priority for the organization. I assume it's a priority for your organization because you're on this call listening to me right now. And so um, a volunteer or a potential volunteer will get a sense of how much of a priority volunteerism is in your organization based on its positioning on your website. If I have to go 3, 4, 5 clicks deep to get to a volunteer application form or to get to a description about what volunteers do in your organization, that's an indication to me that you're not overly interested in engaging with me. It should be a maximum 2 clicks to start getting involved. Look at redundancies within your process. So are you doing screening overkill? And Aaron alluded to some of this. We've got, and unfortunately, as nonprofit organizations, we're dictated to a lot by insurance companies and lawyers. And they say that we have to do this screening for this vulnerable population. And I get working with vulnerable populations is a little bit of a different scenario, but does everyone need to go through a police record check? And why? And think about that critically, because it's a barrier. Stepping into a police station in order to do that is a barrier for some. There's a vulnerability of, even if the application is online, which you can do in some jurisdictions, there's a stigma attached to engaging with a police service, especially if you've had history with police. And so that becomes a barrier to someone who could be a fantastic and phenomenal volunteer. But if they had something that cropped up 20 years ago in their history and they have an aversion to that, then you're creating an unintended barrier. Do a full-on risk assessment if you need to. Can you find someone with expertise in screening to walk you through that process? And it may require bringing somebody in to do that. And you might not be able to get that kind of service for free. I can tell you that ECVO, that we provide that service. And if anyone has questions about that, talk to me afterwards. You can flip me an email. I didn't put my contact information on there, but you can definitely connect through us through Volunteer Alberta. And if I'm competing with anything Volunteer Alberta does, I apologize there. And I'm not trying to compete with the work you're doing. And if you're doing these, if you're taking screening steps, make sure that the potential volunteer understands why they're doing these things. Because if I'm going through a process and I don't understand why I'm doing it, why do I have to do an interview? Why do you need reference checks? Why do you need a police record check? Why do I have to do this hours and hours of training before you even let me in the door? If they don't understand that, you're going to lose them. And so reduce that frustration, eliminate the barriers. If you can start them doing something for the organization before they even get all the way through the screening process, wouldn't that be cool? You know what? We've got a casino coming up in 2 weeks. You can come and do that while you're waiting for the rest of this stuff to go through, and then we'll get you doing some other things. Or I see you've got some graphic design background. We need a couple of things put together. Would you mind doing that for us while we get you set up to do? Have a look at what the volunteer has to offer and engage them in other ways that you don't necessarily have to wait all the way till the end to get them starting to do the volunteer thing. Reduce the amount of paperwork. Volunteers nowadays are really put off by paperwork. We all are put out by paperwork. Health insurance, banking information, any kind of property transaction, buying a vehicle, warranty stuff. There's so much damn paperwork. And if you can get out of that, reduce it as much as possible. If you have to do the paperwork, do it all at once. Rip the Band-Aid, um, condense it all so that if it's got to be cumbersome, make it cumbersome all at once so that you're not spreading it out and they're not rolling their eyes going, oh, here's another thing I got to do. Really condense all of those barriers into as short a time frame as possible. Also, we find that people find a little bit of success if you're able to allow folks to do it in a mobile situation. Make it accessible on their phones. If they're sitting in transit and they can fill out a form online, absolutely allow them to do that. Or if they're wanting to do some of this paperwork after they put the kids to bed, 9-10 o'clock at night, you don't have to do it while you're open. You don't have to be sitting there and like, this doesn't have to be a 9 to 5 thing. Make it as barrier-free as possible. And then finally, what is your call to action? And this is where I want to spend a little bit of time, because I see a lot of folks blasting out volunteer opportunities that just aren't going to make much of a difference. Full disclosure, my wanted poster was generated by AI. I do like to mention when AI helps me out a little bit. It may surprise you to know that I did not draw this myself. But the internet is a very valuable place for things like wanted posters, should you want one. I'm a proponent of that. AI made none of the rest of this presentation, by the way. Otherwise, I would have disclosed that too. But be strategic in how you're looking for folks, how you're communicating with them. Terms like volunteers needed isn't a call to action. Your need for volunteers does not make me want to do anything. Just because you are in need of something doesn't make me pause Netflix. Yep, you need volunteers. Good for you. I'm not interested. The one that drives me absolutely crazy is the messaging that says volunteers desperately needed. What a terrible message to send to people who when you're looking for folks. First of all, it's not a call to action. It makes you sound unsustainable. Makes you sound disorganized. It makes you sound chaotic. And it actually paints a poor picture of your organization. And as your desperation grows, what it does is it decreases your standards of who you'll accept. And that's where we end up in warm body scenario where, oh man, we need somebody for this casino and we're desperate. And someone puts their hands up, it's like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And then you get them and you get them involved and they're late and they're not reliable and they're not necessarily suited for the position. And so you're doing yourself a disservice by getting desperate. And so planning at the front end, like we talked about a few slides earlier, will reduce the chances that you're going to be working from that place of desperation. Also, terms like terms that are generic, they also don't work. The number of times I see somebody say, make a difference. You're competing against 7,000 other organizations who are saying, make a difference. We all make a difference. Calling yourself a good cause is another one that drives me crazy. Name me a bad cause. We're all good causes. Everyone on this call, anyways. Um, and the generic term of calling yourself a good cause is not anything that's any more compelling than the next charity, the next one over. Um, we're all good causes. Avoid the generics. Be specific. So what you need to do is you need to understand your ideal volunteer. Who is that perfect fit? What are their characteristics? What are their skills? Where do you find them? And then speak to them. Tailor your messaging so that you're speaking to that one individual. If you're looking for something with financial skills, you're not going to be putting out hearts and stars and flowers and fluff. Somebody with financial skills typically is somebody that's a little bit more process oriented and will respond to a process oriented message. Now, there are some positions that are well suited for hearts and stars and flowers and fluff, and that's fine. But people are wanting to people who want to get involved and who want to volunteer already have that in them. So an additional sell on the and pull on the heartstrings. Be specific about that. Ironically, you know who's brilliant at that? Not a nonprofit organization. It's WestJet. How many of us sat through those holiday messages, those Christmas messages, and you just watched a 30-second commercial and you're bawling because of what you just watched? And corporations pull on those heartstrings. We have the ability to do that too, but make it tailored to your audience. And then be strategic about where you put it. Don't just throw the message out everywhere. Yeah, you've got your social media channels and you've got a bit of a captured audience there, but go out into the places where those people are. Go talk to places like professional associations. Go talk to parent-teacher associations. Go and talk to sports clubs. Go and talk to where people are and are already gathering. And get your messages into some of those places. Sometimes it's hard to get into them. I know it's not as easy. I make it sound easy. It's not as easy as putting a prompt into AI and getting a beautiful wanted poster like I just gave you. But it does take work, and to do it properly does take work. I'm not gonna blow smoke and say that it's not work. But in order to get the right bums in the right seats, the right people at the right tables, it does take work. So I'm almost at my 30 minutes here. Last slide, I just want to recap. So start by, what are you asking them to do? Provide that position that is meaningful, that provides impact for the clients or the community you're trying to serve. What are you waiting for? Eliminate the downtime in the process. From the time they pause Netflix to the time they do the volunteer thing, whatever that is, reduce that downtime as much as you can. Eliminate your barriers. Still put your risk management lens on. You got to make sure that you keep your folks safe, your clients safe, the public safe, but make sure that the barriers are that you're weighing that risk, and figure out your risk aversion and your vulnerability to risk in that space, because sometimes we're just overly risk averse for no reason. And then what's your call to action? Stop being generic, start being strategic, and start tailoring your messages to the folks you want in your organization that are going to have a strong impact on your bottom line, which is your vision, your mission, and your values. So last slide, I'm going to open it up to questions. I know that we talked about being able to unmute and show. How do you want to do this, Erin?
Yeah, I think I'll come back to questions in one sec. I just know some folks need to go, so I just want to share what's up next and
Sure.
our contact information, and then we can come back to questions. So we'll come back to that in one sec. So up next, so this was the first session in our three-part series, and next we have a Insights and Stories panel. I'll be sitting on that panel alongside my colleague Allison, and some of you may know Elaine Muse, who both have years of experience in the volunteer space. That's on February 25th. Again, I'll send out all this information so you won't miss out as long as you're registered. And then we're ending with a workshop to apply what you've learned here today and what we'll learn together in February to apply it to your unique organization. So there are limited spots, so we welcome you to sign up right away. And then Scott, I can send out your contact information as well to all the registered attendees. But if anybody is watching, yeah, you can always reach out to us. If you want to get in contact with Scott, you can give me a call. You can email the team or myself, and then we can get you connected with whoever you need to talk to, if that's all right. So I'll just go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can move into question and answer time. So give me 1 second.